Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. Like I said in my review earlier this morning, much more entertaining race than last time out in Japan. So again, quite a bit more to talk about in today's power ranking. So starting off with number 20, this was, I think, a difficult race to kind of pick someone to be number 20. I think there were quite a few drivers who were poor weekends, but there wasn't really anyone this time out who I felt was absolutely abysmal. So, on that note, starting out with number 20, I'm going with Jack Doohan. So, qualified 11th, which on the surface was okay, but when you look at the fact that his teammate Gasly qualified in 5th, I think definitely showed that he underperformed in qualifying. In Q2, out-qualified by his teammate Gasly by 0.6 of a second, and that was on the back of a Q1 session where he was actually pretty close to Gasly's pace. And this isn't the first time that this has happened Doohan this year. I think at least one other Grand Prix qualifying session, he's been very, very close to Gasly Q1 before later having quite a big gap. So it does feel like there's some consistency issues with Doohan in terms of one lap performance, where sometimes when he's performing, he can get very, very close to Gasly's level over one lap, but other times it's a bit of a struggle, and you see really big margins like we saw in Q2. In terms of the race, I thought it was okay. I do think that Doohan was hurt a little bit by the strategy that he was on. Safety car timing definitely hurt quite a few drivers today. But again, I felt pretty scrappy race pace is not fantastic. And he did get a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits too many times. So I did feel like those were a couple things going against him. Number 19, I'm going to go with Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, qualified 17th, out-qualified by his teammate Hadjar by 5.7 of a second. That being said, in qualifying, there were some mitigating circumstances. DRS wasn't working, which around a track like this, where there's, I think, 3 DRS zones, that can contribute to quite a bit of lap time. So again, I didn't try to hold that against him too badly, but nonetheless, not a great performance in qualifying. In the race, I thought the race pace was honestly okay. He looked like he was going to finish ahead of Hadjar, but had quite a few clumsy incidents with both Stroll and Hulkenberg. But I did feel like those penalties were quite excessive. Maybe he should have gotten one 5-second penalty, but the 15 seconds total I thought was quite excessive, especially given the two cars on the receiving end. Neither of them really had any substantial damage as far as I can tell. So because of that, I think Lawson ends up finishing the race in 16th, which again, I don't think was entirely representative of what he was really capable of. And, without those penalties, he would have finished 13th on the road, I believe, or even 12th. I think 13th, yeah. But again, not a great weekend for Lawson, and this has been a really tough start to his season. And like I mentioned last weekend, and when he got moved back down to Racing Bulls, he's going to have to be very careful to not, end up going into a Kvyat-esque spiral where the performances, even after getting demoted, kind of go down and down, never kind of regain the heights that we even saw, at points through his short stints in 2024, 2023. Otherwise, I think, there's a potential, not high potential, but I do think there's a potential that, if things continue as they are, he might not even see out the full season. So number 18, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll, qualified 19th, out-qualified by his teammate Alonso by his 6.5 so not great in qualifying there. Race I felt was okay in the end. He had a pretty anonymous race, but finished relatively close to his teammate Alonso. So I think race pace was honestly not too bad. And I think that's part of the reason why I decided to have him above both Lawson and Doohan. Number 17, we're going to go with Gabriel Bortoleto, qualified 18th and finished the race in 18th. Not a whole lot more to add. Qualified by his teammate Hulkenberg by about 10th, which is about what you would expect for a rookie in his 4th Grand Prix. I think he's been okay. Again, not outstanding, but again, because the car is so bad, it's really hard to show more than what he's been doing. And really the most, like I've said before, the most he can really show is just keep it clean and try to stick as close to Hulkenberg or even beat Hulkenberg if possible. Number 16, I'm going to go with Isaac Hajar, qualified 12th. Qualified his teammate Lawson by about 5.7 tenths. But like I said, we're not really sure how representative that is, and didn't get into Q3 like he had done the previous couple weekends. So not sure if it was a track-specific issue or if it was just, maybe not the best session from Hajar. But nonetheless, in the race, somewhat eventful. A pretty bad start, sent him back quite a bit. And then I think it's a bit of a suboptimal strategy with the safety car also hurt him a bit. But nonetheless, not a great race for Hajar, so but ends up finishing 13th in the end. Number 15, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. I think I was checking some of my past power rankings to see what lowest a driver had ever gotten on my power rankings. And still ended up on the podium. And I think previously the record was 10th, and that was Piastri at the Qatar Grand Prix last year. So this time it's Norris, and there's quite a few things to discuss with Norris's Grand Prix. Starting off with qualifies 6th, out-qualified by his teammate Piastri by 0.4 of a second, out-qualified by both Mercedes, out-qualified by Alpine by Gasly and an Alpine, and out-qualified by Leclerc. All in cars I would say are not as good as the McLaren over one lap. So qualifying, not great. When you look at just the race as well, also I think there's also not a super clean race as well. A bit of a silly mistake before we even get to the start of the race with him basically putting the car out of its grid box, which led to a 5-second penalty, which limited the team's options when it came to strategy for the first pit stop. They were kind of forced to pit him early to give him, maximize time for him to recover from said penalty, which he had to serve at the stop. And then even then after that, race pace was, I think, okay, but racecraft, I think, was definitely an issue. Probably should have gone past Leclerc quicker, and probably, I think, given how many issues George Russell was dealing with in his Mercedes, I think probably should have gone past Russell as well. So all in all, a very messy Grand Prix for Norris. A lot of different issues, not just one small thing, like not just qualifying, not just the start. There was a variety of things that he was really struggling with this weekend. And I feel like 15th is an appropriate place for him on my power rankings. Number 14, I go with Nico Hülkenberg. For Hülkenberg, qualified 16th, out-qualified his teammate Bortoleto by 10th and a bit. Unfortunately for him, he got into Q2, but then had his lap that got him into Q2 deleted, so he basically was not forced to start 16th, so again, not great there. The race, really anonymous. Didn't really see a whole lot of him except when he got dive bombed by Lawson. Eventually, he was disqualified for excessive plank wear, so not great there. And, I felt for an okay Grand Prix, I think 14th is a decent spot to put Hülkenberg. Number 13th is Fernando Alonso. Pretty similar to Hülkenberg. Both of them, in pretty slow cars this weekend. They beat their teammates, but again, were really held back by the car and were not really able to compete, a bit further up. For Alonso, qualified 13th, out-qualified his teammate Stroll by 6.5 tenths, like I said before, and then came home to 15th place finish, which, given how important tire wear was around this Bahrain track, and given how many rookies there were who, I felt were not as experienced with, managing F1 Pirelli tires. This was the kind of Grand Prix where a driver of, 350 plus Grand Prix starts, such as Alonso, should have really benefited. But unfortunately, the pace in the Aston Martin really, really poor this weekend, and that really held him back. So I think 13th is a fair spot for Alonso. Number 12, I'm going to go with Kimi Antonelli. Qualifying went very well. I think arguably probably his best qualifying of the season, but was forced to start fifth because of that grid penalty for basically going into the fast lane too early. Out-qualified by his teammate Russell by 0.2 of a second, but again, that margin's come down every single race. If you basically plotted each of the four deltas to Russell in qualifying, he's improved every single one. So again, that's the kind of progress you want to see from Antonelli. In the race, I thought at times he looked very, very good. He had some really nice overtakes on Verstappen and Sainz, I believe. But unfortunately, he did struggle a little bit with tire tire wear, and I think he burned through his tires a little bit too quickly, which is kind of what you would expect at this track. Again, a bit unfortunate that he got dive bombed by Sainz at turn 10. That I think lost him a couple of positions. So again, without that, perhaps he finishes in the points. But again, when you look at where his teammate was in the sister Mercedes, again, I think the bar has to be a little bit higher than that. Than just, scraping into the points, getting 10th, 9th, for example. I do think he was also quite lucky to not get a penalty for track limits, given how many tracks he had, how many laps he had deleted. But again, I guess the stewards, for whatever reason, decided not to give him a penalty for that. So all in all, an okay Grand Prix, but I do think, quite a bit of room for improvement by Antonelli. Number 11, I'm going to go with Alex Albon. So for Albon, qualified in 15th, out-qualified by his teammate by 4.5 tenths. But a bit similar to Lawson, I did feel like there were some mitigating factors there. Albon was forced to basically wait at the end of the queue at the end of turn 1. If you look at the live feed, you could see the cars lining up in the pit or exiting the pit lane, I believe. And you can see basically Albon's basically sticking out the side and has to wait at the back of the queue. As a result, he kind of was forced for his outlap, he was forced to go much harder than he would have, cook the tires, and unfortunately, tires are the optimum temperature window, and that of course is going to hurt your lap time. So I think qualifying, and again, even with that really shoddy lap, because of Hulkenberg's track limits, he should have gotten a second chance to be able to run in Q2. But because the deletion came so late, he wasn't able to do so, which I think was a bit unfortunate for him. In the race, I thought pace was pretty strong, made a couple of nice overtakes early on. Not quite enough time. Maybe without the safety car, he gets in the points, but unfortunately not quite enough time, and ends up finishing at 12th. So I think, a decent race for Albon, some bad luck there, but nonetheless not a bad weekend for the Williams driver. Now, moving into the top 10, number 10, I'm going to go with Behrman. Now, again, this is one of those drivers where if you split these power rankings into a power rankings for the qualifying and a power rankings for the race, if it was for the race, Behrman might be, top 5, top 6. But unfortunately, really underperformed in qualifying yesterday, out-qualified by his teammate Ocon by 7.8 tenths, qualified dead last in 20th. So again, definitely put him on the back foot. Excellent recovery drive, aided by an amazing start where he basically made up 7 positions, I believe, on the opening lap, and that set up a really nice drive on the back of a Haas car that had very strong race pace in the Grand Prix. So a really good drive by Behrman. Now, number 9, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, qualified in 8th, out-qualified Albon by 4.5 tenths. But still, I thought qualifying did a pretty good job, got the most out of the car. In the race, I thought he had a really good start. He looked like he was going to be on for some points. Unfortunately, in contact with Tsunoda just getting a little bit too trigger happy on the throttle, losing the rear of the car. His rear tire basically goes into Sainz's side pod, loses a ton of lap time due to performance, and likely because of that, he had that moment with Antonelli where he kind of forced him off again. I do think, Sainz has to take a little bit of responsibility for that, even if the car was slightly damaged, and that does hold him back in my power ranking a little bit, but unfortunately he was forced to retire the car because of said damage, which I think was not really his fault. Number 8, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Great drive from him. And again, similar situation to Behrman. If I did this just for the race, probably ends up top 5, top 6. But unfortunately, in qualifying, pretty massive shunt. And without that shunt, who knows where he ends up in qualifying. Perhaps gets himself into the top 10. And that would have made his drive on Sunday much easier, and even probably finishes best of the rest ahead of Gasly instead of behind the Alpine driver. Really strong stint in the first stint. Really powerful undercut. Was able to even undercut Verstappen, which I was quite surprised by, and that really set up the rest of the Grand Prix, where he was basically able to be in that hunt for best of the rest with Gasly, and ended up finishing 8th for 4 crucial points. Number 7, I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda. Now, for Tsunoda, qualified 10th, out-qualified by his teammate Verstappen by 9 tenths, almost 9 tenths of a second, which again is a bit too much. But at least this time, that lap, that session where the delta was super massive was Q3. So again, even if it was a bit of a scruffy lap, he at least showed Q1, Q2 that he had at least had enough pace to get himself up into Q3, which is something that he himself in Japan and lost in the first two races, plus Perez for most of the end of last year, was something that was quite a bit of a struggle. So I think getting into Q3 with this very tricky, hard to drive Red Bull was, a pretty decent achievement. Then in the race, again, the first half of the race, first 2/3 of the race, I thought, really, very close in pace to Verstappen. Again, you could see them within the same straight, and that's something that we haven't been talking about in regards to Verstappen's teammates for quite a while. So I think for that point, I thought it was a pretty good Grand Prix for Tsunoda. Again, not perfect. I felt like the move with Sainz was a little bit clumsy on his part, and I think he was a little bit lucky not to get further damage or to get a penalty for that move. Nonetheless, I do think, it's a solid result, especially given the circumstances of, Verstappen struggling so much as well. I think even though it's only a 9th place finish, given that Verstappen was only able to manage 6, I think it was a decent job by Tsunoda. Now, moving into the top row, I think there's a pretty big separation between, I would say, the top 5 and everyone else. So Hamilton, the driver I put in 6, is kind of the best first driver of the second group. After that, kind of top 5, who I felt were kind of like in a league of their own this weekend. So for Hamilton, qualifying a bit of a struggle, qualified in 9th, 5.9 tenths behind his teammate Leclerc, which again, a margin that's simply too big when you're driving for Ferrari. In terms of the race, I thought, pretty strong recovery drive, comes back to finish in 5th. At some points, looked like he was going to be challenging Norris, looking like he might be able to try to get Pipe ahead of him, but unfortunately didn't quite have the pace to do so. Unfortunately, again, for both Ferraris, I think they were hurt by the safety car. Without that, they might have been able to finish ahead of Norris, but, nonetheless, I think, an okay Grand Prix for Hamilton. Qualifying, not great, and the race, pretty good recovery drive, which is something that unfortunately we've had to say too many times over the last 2 years or so. Now, number 5 is Pierre Gasly, best of the rest. He qualified 5th. Like I said, out-qualified Verstappen, out-qualified Norris, so great job from him in qualifying. Promoted to 4th because of Antonelli's penalty. Out-qualified, doing by 6 tenths, like I said before. In the race, I thought did a really good job. Wasn't in discussion so much, and again, came very, very close to finishing 6th on the road, or 6th in the Grand Prix. Was unfortunately pipped by Verstappen on the final lap, so instead of a 6th place, it's a 7th. 2 less points, but I think Gasly will still be pretty happy to finally get some points on the board this season. Number 4, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. Now, to be honest, drivers 1 through 4, I think it's very difficult to kind of differentiate them. And in these kind of situations, I usually kind of just go by finishing order, which I guess kind of gives a spoiler to what the rest of the order is going to be. But nonetheless, I do feel like the top 4 drivers were, very, very good and very, very difficult to, differentiate them. So number 4, Verstappen, qualified 7th. Pretty bad qualifying session, but I think the Red Bull this past weekend was, an absolute horror show to drive. So I think okay there. And then in the race, I think did the best, managed, did his best to limit the damage in terms of points gap to the top, to the leaders, and came home to a 6th place drive. Had a couple good overtakes. Was also quite unlucky with the fact that he had 2 very slow pit stops, which could have easily really unraveled his race, but stayed focused, kept his head down, and so had some very good pace, when he was able to do so. Number 3, I guess we're saying number 3 and number 2 at the same time. So number 3, Charles Leclerc, number 2, George Russell. So for Leclerc, qualified 3rd, started 2nd because of Russell's penalty. For Leclerc, qualified Hamilton by 6 tenths, like I said, so really good for him. I think without that safety car, really good chance that he ends up on the podium instead of Norris. I think he, didn't, again, very similar to Suzuka. I feel like he maximized the performance of the Ferrari. Not quite on the same level as the McLaren or the Mercedes. I felt this race, and again, very, very close to a podium. And just unfortunately, the strategy and the safety car kind of unraveling that. For Russell, I think absolutely amazing Grand Prix by him. Qualified 2nd. Qualified Antonelli by 2 tenths, and then in the Grand Prix, very, very good pace. Again, wasn't really able to challenge Piastri, but as you know, his technical issue seems to get worse and worse over the course of the race. He didn't allow that to kind of unravel him, like cause him to lose a podium, and he just kept his head down, kept going, and I thought did a really, really good job to secure P2 ahead of the faster McLaren of Norris. Now, number one, not a big surprise, is your race winner, Oscar Piastri. Took pole position, got fastest lap, got the win. Pretty obvious that he was going to be number one in my power ranking. So qualifies first, like I said. It qualified Norris by 0.4 of a second, so really good job done there. In terms of pace, just control the pace at the front. Never really looked under pressure by Russell behind. The only time really he looked under pressure was at the safety car restart. But then other than that, just did a really good job to control the pace at the front. Never really looked under pressure. And again, looks like a very formidable foe for Norris in the championship fight this year. So thank you so much for watching. That's my power rankings for the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix. And I'll be back with my preview of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, or the final leg of this triple header. So thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.